Okay, hi everyone. So in this tutorial, we are going to look at how you can receive data using Flask. So in the previous tutorial, we spoke about GET requests and how a GET request is fired by the URL in a web browser. A GET request is one of the methods in which we can actually send data to our web server. And you will often see on websites that the websites themselves will have things like action is equal to or whatever, you'll see these values being carried in the URL of the website. So that's a GET request that carries data. And I can do that simply by putting a question mark and putting in a key. So I'm going to say, codename is equal to 007. So that's going to be a GET request where I'm sending a variable called codename is equal to 007 to my web server. In my web server, the code to receive that data is through what's known as a request object. So at this point here, it's worth noting that every time you run a view function in Flask, that view function creates a request object. Now, the request object actually contains information about the request, and it can actually contain the variables that we're looking for. So to get the variables from a GET request, we can actually get that from request.args, args being the variables that have been passed in the URL. So for us, we're looking for a key of codename, and we're going to store that somewhere. So let's store it in a variable. I might just create a variable called codename and say it's equal to request.args. And then I'm going to pass that back into the page. Why? Because I can. So I'm going to say message is equal to codename. So I'm going to get that from the GET request, and then I'm going to send it back to the page. Inside my login page, I've got the message coming in. So the message variable is coming in. And so I'm going to run this code with question mark codename is equal to 007. I run it, and you can see that comes back into the page. And in fact, if I actually rename this whatever I want, that's also going to come into the page. At this point here, though, if you made a mistake with, say, codename, you will get a bad request error. And the bad request error will actually stop your web server, and you're going to have to restart your web server. It's quite a nasty little error, and it's probably one of the most common errors. A bad request error means that you try to find a variable in the request that does not exist. And so to give you an example, I was looking for a variable called codename. Let's just say I typed in a variable called code and I press enter. This is a bad request error because my web server went looking for a variable that does not exist. And unfortunately, it actually breaks the web server. So I will need to close the web server and restart the web server if I wanted to get it working, which I don't at the moment. So that's a GET request. GET requests are quite common because they're quite easy for the user. For example, you sometimes you use them. The link carries the variables that the server is expecting. But sometimes a GET request can be fairly insecure, and that's the reason why oftentimes the verify email link might only last a minute or so, because the GET request can be used by hackers sometimes to put their own data and send their own data into the server, or even possibly do SQL injection if the variables in the GET request are being used in some type of SQL query. So just be mindful of that. That's not to say they shouldn't be used, but a safer way is to use what's called a post request. And that's what we're going to look at now. A post request is used. A post request is used when you're actually sending data via a form. Okay, so for the moment, I'm actually just going to return my login code to that there. you'll need to do that, otherwise you will get some errors at the moment. All right, we're going to go to the register view function. Now, to enable a post request, we actually do need to change the app.root to allow that method. So I'm going to put a comma here. I'm going to type in methods is equal to, and one of the methods will enable get, but it won't be used. One of the methods is post. So we need to enable the post method because it's getting form data. And the form data is going to be sent to this register view function. Right. So going to the register page, you can see that I've got my form. What I hadn't done, but I want you to do now, is you need to set the form action. The form action describes where the data is going to go. Now, you could actually set that form action to anywhere. I mean, you could send it to another website across the internet. You could send it to another page or another view function. For us, we're just going to choose, for our register page, we're going to choose to send the register form data back to the register page, just because it's just where we know we can look for it and we know we can handle that data. So it's far easier if you just send the data back to the same page that is running. So we're going to send all this data here. We've got 5 inputs. We're going to send those 5 inputs to the register page, and that's triggered via the submit button. The submit button is a very special HTML type that will send the data to the action. The other thing we can do is we can choose the method. Currently, I've just got the method as get, and I'll show you what happens if you have the method as get. If I go back to my page, I can't remember if I restarted the web server or not. No, I haven't restarted the web server, so I'll do that now. Note that if you get a bad request error, you will need to restart your web server. So here I've restarted my web server. I'm going to go to my register page and click register. Right, now I can just type stuff in here. Remember, an email must have an @ symbol in it. Password, click submit. And currently the method is get. So you'll notice that because the method is get on the form, all that data I typed has gone into the URL, which is not what we want. So we're going to change the method to post. And now the information will not be in the URL. It'll be sent to the server, but it won't be in the URL. So now we need to receive that data. And I'm going to go to the Flask app file. And to receive the data, firstly, I need to know that the data exists. And what I mean by that is if I try to get the data already, so when the page first loads, if I try to get that data and it doesn't exist, I'm going to get a bad request error. So I need to ensure the data exists, and I can do so by testing that the request method is post. Because remember, the request object is created when a view function has been triggered. So I need to ensure that the method exists and it's post. And now I can get the values from a Python dictionary that the request object contains. And I'm going to create a variable for each one. So the variables were, I think, lname, there was fname, there was password, there was password confirm. I'm just creating variable names at the moment, but it's important that you're consistent. I find consistency is very important, otherwise you'll make errors with coding. And I think I also had email. Right. So these are my variable names. Really, I could have called them anything. But I do know that the values in the post data will have the same name as the names of the inputs themselves. So the names of the inputs becomes the keys inside the post data's Python dictionary. And the Python dictionary that I'm talking about is request.form. And so that's fname, and then it's got request.form. So this is the post data that I'm finding right now. You need to be very careful that your keys line up with the names of the inputs. If you don't line them up properly, you are going to get a bad request error, which is probably the most common error you get in Flask. And what we'll do in a second is we'll just test to see what data we got back. Okay, so that's all the data that I've got from the form. Now, I could output that to the screen, but why don't I just output to the log as well? Because you do need to sometimes use your log just to quietly check stuff. So I'm going to go app.logger.info, and I'm just going to send the email to the log to make sure that that's working. So that's just testing that I've got the data. I may very well get a bad request error if I haven't been consistent. So just be mindful that you can get errors. I'm going to clear the Flask log. I'm going to go back and I'm going to reload the register page, type in some stuff. And I should get ASD at ASD when I actually submit. I'm going to click submit, and I spelt something wrong. So going back over here, I went Luger instead of Logger. I'll just see whether I have to reload the web server or not. No, I don't. Good. Sometimes the errors are recoverable, other times they are not. Okay, let's try again. There. Okay, so we're assuming the data's gone through. Let's have a look at our Flask log. And that did not, the Flask log did not do anything. So I do need to actually reload my page. I've got logger.info email. Right, let's try again. I am feeling confident this time around. So I'll just reload that a couple of times. And let's have a look at the Flask log. There seems to be some error here. Oh, I need to overwrite. For some reason the Flask log was having an error. It seems like it should work though. Oh, that's better. All right, not sure why it was saying there was some kind of newer error or something or another. Okay, there we go. ASD is at ASD. So it's getting the data from our page. And I could log anything I want there. All right, I need to stop now because it's been 14 minutes. I'll see you in the next tutorial. So just a reminder, that's the code that we are currently up to. You might like to just try passing another variable, create another input type, see if you can get that. Maybe change the log to see if you can log some other value. Just so you get familiar with the code and how it works. And don't freak out if you get a bad request error. Just make sure that you check the names of the values with the variables that you are receiving. Okay, thank you very much.